Wherever you are in the world, welcome to another edition of Jerry's Take on China. This morning, I received an interesting comment on social media based on the script of one of my previous videos. I was accused of enthusiastically advocating authoritarianism. The respondent suggested that China didn't deserve praise, and I praised it only because it was a condition of my visa. I did reply in detail, but then I felt the detail was important enough to merit a more full reply and open it to other critics. So here it is. On what basis do we think China is authoritarian? Nothing could be further from the truth. The people of China live much freer than the people of the other two countries that I've lived in, the UK and Australia. And I suspect my respondent is getting her information from media rather than from experience. To know a country, surely we need to live in it, or at least visit it. As for military expansion, I'd love to hear more about this. China hasn't expanded its borders in my lifetime. Although there are some disputes in the South China Sea, they are historical and being well managed by the governments concerned. Without interference from the USA, they might even be better managed. There are some issues on the Indian border which do cause concerns, but that border, which is called the McMahon Line, was drawn by the British in 1914 without consulting China and arbitrarily took land away from China. Every qualified expert I've ever seen commenting on China's military buildup has said the same thing. It's a defensive military, it's not an aggressive offensive military. China has one overseas base in Djibouti, where it works with the USA to assist in the piracy problem in that region. But of course, if you're not getting your information from qualified military experts, you're probably getting it from politicians who are lobbied, bribed by manufacturers of weapons, or you're getting it from media which sniffs a good story and then misinforms you. You don't believe everything you read in the papers, do you? Unless, of course, it's about China. China doesn't have 750 military bases and over 170,000 military personnel around the world. China wasn't involved in wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, or Libya. But it's strange that the countries which were are the ones suggesting China's a threat. My positive attitude for China comes from almost 2 decades of living here. 17 years of living in Australia and 28 years of living in the UK, where I was a police officer. If you want to know about authoritarian, then consider how it was to live in Margaret Thatcher's UK. I did, and I was part of the authoritarian rule. I saw how black people were treated in London because I was on the front line of the Brixton riots. I went to Toxteth in Liverpool and I saw more there. I fought the National Front in Lewisham and I fought miners in Nottingham. That was a very authoritarian time. So much so that in 1987, I opted out and went to live in Australia, only to find a different kind of oppression there. Economic oppression. There's a price for everything. I owned a house but had a mortgage I couldn't service. On top of that, I had rates to pay. You might call them property taxes. When I wanted any sort of government service, there was a fee. But I was paying over 25% of my income in taxes and Medicare charges. And then they introduced private medical insurance, so I needed to pay more for the same services. Then compulsory superannuation was introduced because they told me they couldn't afford my pension anymore. I was also paying a sales tax on everything that I bought. They called it goods and services tax, GST. Other countries call it value-added tax, VAT. And they even started charging me for entry into a national park. 20 years ago, I was earning over 100,000 Australian dollars a year and living from paycheck to paycheck and needing credit cards just to survive. I don't talk supportively about China because it supplies me with a visa. Anyone in my position can apply for a visa. Anyone who has qualifications to work here and a job to do can apply for a visa. I've never once heard of one person being rejected, although some journalists will report that they've had trouble. The reason they have trouble is because they're probably lying to you about how authoritarian it is. For example, The very fact that even the BBC still has journalists inside China and still reports lies about China should tell you that China doesn't have the authoritarian government they're telling you about. But let me give you a bigger example. Just imagine, in a real authoritarian state, if the BBC went to a part of the country where they say there are 1 million people incarcerated, and they travel around the region but get no images of these incarcerations, then they tell you they're being followed, but always by plainclothes police. Then they set up a camera in a public place looking into private places, and they get asked to leave by the security. They refuse, and the security, rather than harass them, calls the police. The police arrive. They ask them to leave. They argue, and they film the argument. If you can understand Chinese, you might be able to hear the discussion and how rude the BBC are to the police and the security, who are just doing their job. But very cleverly, the BBC don't allow you to hear it. They show the scene of the police officer's hand blocking the camera, and they put a studio-made narration over the top of the discussion. Why won't they let us hear what's being said? Because the police are reasonably and fairly telling them they can't film without permission, they don't have permission, and they need to leave. Something that would happen in any country. There's nothing authoritarian about protecting private property. And here's where their narrative really falls over. They leave the scene with their cameras, video footage, and all their memory cards intact. I once asked a friend of mine who's a senior journalist in Guangdong, why do the police allow them to do that and not arrest them, or at least take away their memory cards? And his answer surprised even me. That would be illegal, Jerry. Well, that kind of destroys the BBC narrative, doesn't it? There they are, gathering evidence of an authoritarian state and proving, by the fact that they've still got the evidence, that they aren't authoritarian at all. If you live here long enough on a legal visa, if you have a job, contribute to society and pay your taxes, China welcomes you. They don't hesitate to give visas. In fact, they encourage well-qualified people to come. But since 2017, they changed the rules a little. They started to check visa applications more thoroughly. Since that time, university qualifications need to be notarized, and they are checked for authenticity. They also require a police background check, and criminals might not be allowed a visa. Teachers are required to be not only qualified, but have 2 years of experience. And since then, many people, perhaps people that the China haters enjoy following, have left China. Why did they leave? I don't know, you can ask them. But if they have a criminal record, if they had no experience or were unqualified, they can't stay or apply for jobs here. And a job contract is one of the criteria of a working visa. That's not authoritarian. That's a sensible application of rules. Why not ask those people, those of them who are telling you that China is authoritarian from outside of China? And if you press them for examples, maybe they'll admit they have a drug conviction, or they assaulted someone in a drunken fit a few years ago. Or perhaps they'll just tell you they never went to university and they were actually faking being teachers. Alternatively, you could ask the thousands of foreigners who still live in China, who, like has been suggested of me, are all assumed to be lying. We've stayed here because we enjoy the lifestyle and the cost of living, which hasn't increased in the last few years. Some of us have mortgages and found the interest rates came down last year, unlike the West, where they rose month after month. And finally, in my case, I was lucky. I met and married the most wonderful lady. Being married and now retired from full-time work and having legally worked here for many years means I can apply for and be granted permanent residence. My stance on China is because of all of these factors. Anyone with a position that's different is quite likely based on either a lack of experience or misinformation. I've traveled through impoverished regions on dirt tracks, and I've met people who probably didn't know what a 100 RMB note, $15, looked like. But that was years ago. Since then I've been back and I've seen smooth surface roads, telecommunications that are more advanced than anywhere else I've been to or visited. I've posted videos and photos to my social media from a desert 180 kilometers outside the nearest town, and it's all worked. I've witnessed China's changes from poverty and corruption with crime problems to becoming almost totally crime-free, a place where government services meets the needs of the people without associated fees, and a place where the police are respected and admired but not feared. Yeah, there are things I don't like about China. The banking system is inefficient and cumbersome. The fact I need to show my passport to go to another city by public transport or check into a hotel. But you know what? These are minor inconveniences when they're placed into the broader context of a life in which I have no money worries, no fear of being robbed or shot. I know if I'm sick, I can go to the hospital and get immediate, cost-effective, modern healthcare rather than potentially face either bankruptcy or a 2-year wait. I don't say nice things about China for a visa. I have a visa. I choose to remain here with that visa because of those nice things. I hope that clears up a few things, and thanks once again for watching Jerry's Take on China. Look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.